Hello everyone. Today's story is about a man whose wife's sister was staying in his house for 15 days, and on the night 12, she pulled him into his own bedroom and said, "You deserve this. Come here." Let's begin. I'll meet you at the end of the video.
My wife's sister pulled me into my own bedroom and said, "You deserve this." I had no idea what was coming next. I still don't fully know how to explain what happened in that hallway. 11 at night. My own house. I'm just trying to get to the bathroom and suddenly Neve is stepping out of the guest room and grabbing my arm and whispering, "Please, somewhere private." Her voice so low I almost thought I imagined it. And I'm standing there in my socks on the hardwood floor thinking, what is happening right now? Her eyes were doing something I had never seen in them before. Not nervousness, not embarrassment, something heavier than both of those things combined. And she was looking at me like she had been holding something back for a very long time and it had finally gotten too heavy to carry alone. That was night 12. She had been staying with us for 15 days total. The guest room at the end of the hall. She was supposed to leave in 3 days. I had no idea what she was about to tell me. Let me back up. Because none of this makes sense without the before part. And the before part is not dramatic. That's almost the worst thing about it. It was just ordinary life. The kind of ordinary that you don't question because questioning it would mean admitting something is wrong and you don't want to admit that because then you have to do something about it. My name is Callum Vreed. I was 34 years old. I lived in Asheville, North Carolina in a 4-bedroom house that my wife Dorian had decorated so carefully it sometimes felt like living inside a magazine. Everything had a place. Everything matched. The throw pillows matched the curtains, matched the candles on the mantel. It was a beautiful house. I want to say that clearly because I don't want to make it sound like my life was miserable before all this. It wasn't. Or at least I didn't think it was. Dorian and I had been married for 7 years. We met in our late 20s. Dated for 2 years, got married in a vineyard outside of Hendersonville on a Saturday in October with about 60 people watching. My mother cried. Her mother gave a toast that went on too long. I remember thinking, standing at that altar, that I had figured something out that a lot of people never figure out. That I had gotten it right. 7 years later, I was still in that house. Still smiling at dinners. Still telling myself everything was fine. I had learned somewhere along the way to take up less space. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. Dorian was the one with opinions about restaurants and vacation destinations and how the living room should be arranged. I didn't fight that. I thought that was just how marriages worked. You find your lane and you stay in it. My lane was fixing things. Doing the grocery run on Sunday mornings. Remembering to schedule the HVAC service before summer. Making sure the cars had oil changes. Useful stuff. The kind of stuff that keeps a life running but doesn't make anyone feel particularly seen. I told myself I was okay with that. For a long time I really believed I was. Neve showed up on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of March. She had a big rolling suitcase. A tote bag stuffed with books. And this look on her face when she came through the front door like she was bracing herself for something she hadn't told anyone about. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just helped her carry the suitcase down the hall to the guest room and told her to let me know if she needed extra towels. She was staying 15 days. Her apartment in Raleigh was being renovated after a pipe burst and ruined the floors in 2 rooms. Dorian had offered the guest room immediately. It was a generous thing to do. It seemed like a generous thing to do. Neve was 3 years younger than Dorian. They had grown up together in Charlotte. Shared a room for most of their childhood. Had that specific kind of closeness that sisters who are only a few years apart sometimes develop. A shared language. Finishing each other's sentences. Old jokes that made no sense to anyone else. But they were different women. That became clear to me pretty quickly. Dorian walked into a room and immediately assessed it. Who was there? What the social dynamics were. Where she fit and how to make sure she fit in the best possible way. I don't mean that as a criticism. She was genuinely good at it. She made people feel like they were the most interesting person at the party. It was a skill. A real one. Neve walked into a room and just sat down. She didn't perform anything. She would ask you a question and then actually wait for the answer. Not the way people wait for their turn to talk. She was actually listening. She noticed details about people. She noticed when someone was tired. She noticed when a conversation was making someone uncomfortable. She had this quiet attentiveness that made you feel like you could say something honest and not have it used against you later. I liked her. I want to be very straightforward about that because it matters for everything that comes after. I liked Neve as a person, as my wife's sister who was staying in our guest room. That's what it was in the beginning. Nothing more than that. I need you to understand that part before we get to night 12. The first few days were easy. She fit into the house without disrupting anything. She woke up early, made her own coffee, worked from the kitchen table on her laptop during the day. She didn't ask for things. She helped with dishes without being asked. On her third night, she made dinner for all three of us without any warning. Just started cooking around 6 o'clock, and when I walked in from the garage, she handed me a knife and said, "You look like someone who needs something useful to do." I laughed. I couldn't remember the last time someone in that house made me laugh. Dorian ate quickly that night. She said it was good. Then she went to the bedroom to take a call. She was on the phone until almost 10. I cleaned up. Neve sat at the kitchen table and kept me company without making it feel like she was doing something deliberate. We talked about her renovation, about Asheville, about a book she was reading that she kept saying I would hate but should read anyway. It was the kind of conversation I had not had in that house in longer than I wanted to admit. I didn't think anything of it. I should have been paying attention to different things. Looking back, the signs were all there. Dorian's phone screen facing down whenever I walked into a room. The new habit of showering at night instead of the morning, which she had never done in 7 years. The way she stopped asking about my day. Not in a dramatic cold shoulder way. Just a gradual fading, like a radio station you're slowly drifting out of range of. So gradual you almost don't notice until you realize you can't hear anything anymore. I noticed she mentioned a name more often than she used to. Prescott. He was a colleague at her firm. I had met him twice at company events. Tall, good-looking in a practiced way, the kind of man who puts his hand on your shoulder when he talks to you like you've been friends for years. I had noticed that at the second event, the way he touched Dorian's lower back when they were talking. Not long, just a second. I almost said something that night on the drive home. I started to. Then I looked at Dorian's face in the passenger seat and she looked so relaxed, so at ease, and I thought, I am about to say something embarrassing. I thought, this is just how people are at work events. I thought, I'm being ridiculous. I did not say anything. I apologized later that night for being quiet on the drive home. I told her I was just tired. She kissed my cheek and said she understood. I keep coming back to that. The fact that I apologized. For being quiet on the drive home when I was actually sitting there trying to decide whether my instincts were worth trusting. By the end of Neve's first week in the house, I had started noticing something else. The way she went quiet at certain moments. The way she watched Dory, and sometimes when Dorian was talking, this careful, measured watching like she was counting something. And twice, I caught Neve looking at me with an expression I couldn't name. It wasn't pity exactly. It wasn't anything I knew how to label. It was there, and then it was gone before I could look at it long enough to understand it. Dorian was away one night that week. A work dinner in Greenville that she had mentioned on Monday and left for on Thursday afternoon. She texted me when she arrived, texted when dinner was starting, went quiet after that. I texted around 9 to say goodnight. The read receipt came through at 9:42. No response until the next morning. I sat in the living room until almost midnight. Neve came out of the guest room around 10 for water and found me sitting there with the TV on and the volume down to almost nothing. She didn't make a big thing of it. She just said, "Do you want actual company or do you want me to leave you alone?" I said I didn't know. She sat down on the other end of the couch. We watched some nature documentary for an hour without talking much. It was one of the least lonely hours I'd had in months and I didn't understand why. That should have told me something. The fact that sitting in silence with Neve felt more like company than any conversation I'd had with Dorian in weeks. 3 more days passed. Everything on the surface looked normal. Dorian came home from Greenville. Life continued. Dinners, mornings, the regular rotation of a shared house. But something had changed in Neve's behavior, and I couldn't put my finger on what. She was still warm, still present, but there was a tension in her now, a held-back quality. She was deciding something. I just didn't know what. Night 12. I'm walking down the hall around 11. The house is quiet. Dorian had gone to bed early. Said she had a headache. I'm heading to the bathroom at the end of the hall, and Neve steps out of the guest room at exactly that moment, and she sees me and she stops. And for about 3 seconds, neither of us moves. Then she says it. Please. Somewhere private. Just those 3 words. Her voice barely above a breath. And I look at her face and I understand that whatever this is, it is serious. I don't think about what I'm doing. I just start walking toward our bedroom, my bedroom, the master, because it's at the other end of the house from where Dorian is sleeping. Neve follows me. I close the door. She stands near the window with her arms crossed over her chest like she's trying to hold her own ribs together. And I say, Neve, what is going on? She doesn't answer right away. She looks at the floor. Then she looks up at me and says, you deserve to know this. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. I kept telling myself she would stop on her own. But she's not stopping. And now she wants me to lie for her. And I can't do that. I feel something cold move through my chest. I say, who wants you to lie? Neve closes her eyes. She says, Dorian. And that's when I freeze. The next thing she says, I'm not ready for. Not even a little bit. She says the name Prescott and the word months in the same sentence and something about a hotel in Greenville, and I'm standing in my own bedroom at 11 o'clock at night, and the walls do not move, but everything inside them feels suddenly rearranged. I don't say anything. I can't. Neve watches my face. She's not doing it cruelly. She looks like someone who just handed a person a weight they know is going to hurt and hated having to do it. She says she had confronted Dorian twice. She says both times Dorian told her she was being dramatic. She says last week Dorian asked her to say they'd been together on certain Thursdays if I ever asked. That was the line. That was the thing that made Neve decide she couldn't wait anymore. I look at her and the first thing I say, which makes no sense, is, are you sure? She says, Callum. I followed her. And then I don't say anything at all. I sit down on the edge of the bed. My own bed. And the room is completely quiet. And Neve just stands there near the window, not filling the silence, not trying to make it easier, just letting me be inside it because there is nothing she can say that is going to make this easier. I don't know how long we stay like that. Feels like a long time. Eventually I say, go back to your room. Get some sleep. She looks at me. She says, are you going to be okay? I say, I don't know yet. She nods. She leaves. I hear the guest room door close softly down the hall. And I sit in my bedroom for the rest of the night without sleeping. I don't know what I expected morning to feel like. I thought maybe I'd wake up and some part of the night would feel less real. Like maybe I'd misunderstood something or Neve had gotten some detail wrong or there was an explanation that would make the whole thing collapse into something manageable. There wasn't. I know this because of the legal pad. I found it in the kitchen junk drawer. That sounds strange. But when I came downstairs at 6 in the morning after not sleeping at all, I needed to do something with my hands. I needed to write things down because if I didn't write them down, they were just going to spin around inside my head until I couldn't function. So I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, found the legal pad in the junk drawer, and I started writing down every detail I could remember from the last several months that had felt off. It took almost 2 hours. The list was longer than I wanted it to be. The Thursday dinners. The phone face down on the counter. The shower timing. The Greenville work dinner where she stopped texting at 9. The way she had started leaving the room for calls she used to take in front of me. The birthday gift I never understood. She came home one afternoon in February with a bag from a men's clothing store and said it was for her colleague's birthday. I remember thinking, do people usually shop for male colleagues' birthday gifts at boutique clothing stores? I remember deciding not to ask. I remember filing it away somewhere I didn't have to look at it. Prescott's birthday is in February. I didn't know that yet when I wrote the list. I found it out later. I put the legal pad face down when I heard Neve's door open. She came into the kitchen already dressed, already moving carefully, like she was aware of how much space she was taking up. She poured herself coffee and sat across from me. She looked like she hadn't slept either. She said, do you want to talk or do you want quiet? I said, I want to ask you something. She said, okay. I said, how long have you known? She looked at her coffee mug. She said, 11 weeks. 11 weeks. that landed somewhere low in my stomach and just sat there. I said, and she asked you to cover for her. Neve said yes. She said Dorian had told her I was too trusting to notice, that I would believe whatever explanation she gave me, that I didn't ask enough questions to be a problem. I want to tell you that hearing that made me angry, and it did eventually, but in that moment, sitting at that kitchen table with the legal pad face down in front of me, the thing I felt most was embarrassed, which is a terrible feeling to describe because it makes no sense that I was the one who felt embarrassed. But I did, because somewhere inside me, I recognized that she wasn't wrong. I hadn't asked questions. I had noticed things and filed them away. I had watched signs appear one after another and kept choosing to believe the simpler explanation because the other explanation required me to do something hard. That is not an easy thing to sit with over a cup of coffee at 6 in the morning. Neve said, I need to show you something. She unlocked her phone and slid it across the table. There were messages between her and Dorian. I read them slowly. Dorian's side of the conversation was not the voice of a woman who was scared of getting caught. It was the voice of a woman who was managing a situation. Clinical. Certain. At one point she told Neve he won't look too hard. He never does. At another point she said, just say we were at that wine bar on Callum Street. He won't check. He never does. I read that 3 times. Then I slid the phone back across the table and I said, does she know you're telling me? Neve said no. I said, she's gonna figure it out. Neve said, I know. I said, what happens to you when she does? Neve looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, that's not something you need to worry about right now. I pushed back on that. I said, yes it is. Because you're risking something telling me this. You're risking your relationship with your sister. You've been sitting on this for 11 weeks and you came to me in a hallway at 11 at night and now you're here at 6 in the morning showing me messages and I want to know what this costs you. Neve's jaw tightened. She looked away. Then she said quietly, she asked me to be part of it. She asked me to lie to her husband. And I couldn't find a version of myself that was okay with that. There was nothing to say to that. We sat in that kitchen for another hour, talking through details, dates, places. Neve remembered more than I expected. She was careful with her information. She didn't speculate. She only told me things she had directly seen or heard or had documented on that phone. There was a precision to it that I only understood later was her protecting me. Not filling in gaps with guesses. Only facts. Because she knew I was going to need facts. Dorian came downstairs at 8:15. I had moved to the couch by then. Neve was back in the guest room. The legal pad was in the drawer again. Dorian came in wearing her silk pajamas, looked at me and said, why are you up so early? I said I couldn't sleep. She said, you should take something, you know melatonin actually works. She poured herself coffee, asked if we needed more creamer, said she had a work thing in the afternoon and might be home late. She kissed my forehead on her way out of the kitchen. I sat there and let her. I had a decision to make. And I needed to make it carefully. Because Neve was right about one thing. I needed more than what I had. I needed to look for myself. Not because I doubted Neve. I didn't. But because when the moment came and I knew the moment was coming, I needed to be standing on something solid. Not just someone else's account of what happened. My own eyes. My own evidence. My own certainty. So I waited. Dorian left for her work thing at 2. Neve went quiet in the guest room. And I sat down at the kitchen table with our shared bank account open on my laptop and I started from the beginning. I almost missed the first charge. It was filed under a consulting service name I didn't recognize. But the date was a Thursday. And the location, when I looked it up, was a boutique hotel 12 minutes from Dorian's office. The amount was the kind of amount 2 people split for one night. Not a solo business trip rate. I stared at that number for a long time. I found 5 more Thursday entries in 4 months. I found the family law firm consultation. $250. Filed 3 months ago. An attorney she had not mentioned. A conversation she had initiated before I had any idea there was anything wrong with our marriage. I found the savings transfer. $12,000, moved to an account I did not have access to. I had not been informed. I had not been asked. It was just gone. Quiet and gone. By the time Dorian's car pulled into the driveway at 6:47 that evening, I had everything printed. 3 piles on the coffee table. Bank statements. Printed screenshots from Neve's phone. The name of the law firm. I heard her key in the lock. I heard her heels on the entryway floor. I heard her call my name in that soft voice she used when she wanted the house to feel like it always did. I sat in the living room and I did not answer. She found me there. She looked at the coffee table. Her face went very still. And then she did the thing that told me everything I needed to know about how little she had expected this moment to come. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look caught. She looked inconvenienced. She looked at those 3 piles of paper the way someone looks at a problem they didn't anticipate and are already calculating how to solve. I watched her do that, and I felt the last 7 years get very quiet inside me. I asked one question, just one. I said, "How long?" She didn't answer right away. She walked further into the room. She sat in the chair across from me. She smoothed her pants legs the way she always did when she was gathering herself. And then she looked up at me and said, "This is not what it looks like." I said, "I have the hotel charges." She said, "Work meetings sometimes require." I said, "I have the law firm." She stopped. I said, "I have the account." For the first time, something crossed her face that wasn't calculation. It was there for a half second and then it was gone. But I saw it. It was fear. Not heartbreak. Not guilt. Fear that the version she had been planning was going to cost her more than she had budgeted. Then she did something I had not predicted. She turned toward the hallway and she said Neve's name. Not to call her. Not to ask for her. She said it like an accusation. Like a verdict. She said, "Neve put you up to this." I said, "Neve told me the truth." Dorian laughed once. Small and bitter. She said, "Neve has been waiting years for something like this. She's been jealous of what we have since the beginning." I looked at my wife and I thought about Neve sitting across from me at 6 in the morning with her coffee and her careful facts and her voice that broke slightly when she told me she had sat on this for 11 weeks because she kept hoping she wouldn't have to be the one to say it. I thought about that legal pad. I thought about the hotel charge timestamps all those Thursdays. And I said, "What we have." Dorian's eyes sharpened. I said, "I've been trying to figure out what we have for a long time. And I think you knew that. And I think you decided it was easier to manage me than to be honest with me." She said, "That's not fair." I said, "I have a receipt from a men's clothing store in February. Prescott's birthday is February 18th. She stood up. She said, "You've been investigating me." I said, "I've been reading our bank statements." She opened her mouth and then closed it. She stood there in the middle of our perfect living room, in our perfect house, and for the first time in 7 years I watched her not know what to say. Neve appeared in the hallway. She had heard enough. She was standing there with her arms at her sides looking at her sister. Dorian looked at Neve and her voice changed. Cold and flat and final. She said, "You had no right." Neve said, "You asked me to lie to him." Dorian said, "You don't know what you've done." Neve said, "I know exactly what I've done." The room went very quiet. I stood up. I told Dorian I was going to call an attorney in the morning. I told her I wasn't asking her to leave tonight because it was late and I wasn't interested in a scene. I told her I was sleeping in the guest room. She said, "This is not how this ends." I said, "It already did." I went down the hall. I passed Neve without looking at her because if I had looked at her right then I don't know what would have happened. I went into the guest room and closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a very long time. From down the hall, I heard Dorian make a phone call, her voice low and sharp. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't try. I made a mistake the morning after that conversation. I want to say that plainly because I think owning it matters. I told myself I was going to be calm, controlled, that I was going to handle the next few days like a rational person who had simply decided to end a marriage and was taking the appropriate legal steps. I told myself I had already processed the worst of it overnight. I hadn't. What I actually did was walk into the kitchen at 7 in the morning and find Dorian already there, dressed like she was going somewhere, drinking coffee at my kitchen table like nothing had occurred the night before, calm, put together, face arranged into an expression that I can only describe as composed sadness, the kind that was designed to be seen. And I lost it. Not loudly. That's the thing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I just stood in the doorway and said things I had been filing away for years in a voice so flat it didn't even sound like me. I told her I remembered every time she laughed at me in front of people. Every time she redirected a conversation I started. Every time she told me I was too sensitive when I tried to say something wasn't working. I said all of it at 7 in the morning in a voice like a door closing. I don't regret it, but I also know it was not controlled. And it gave her something she immediately tried to use. She went quiet while I talked. She let me finish. And then she said, in a voice designed for a witness, that she was worried about me. That I wasn't thinking clearly. That she had called her mother last night because she was concerned about how I was handling this. Her mother. I understood exactly what she was doing. She was already building the version of the story where I was unstable. Where she was the reasonable one who had tried to hold things together while I came apart. She was putting pieces into place. Her mother, who adored her and had complicated feelings about me since before the wedding, was going to be the first person who heard whatever version Dorian chose to tell. And then came the thing I really had not prepared for. Dorian said, calmly, that her attorney had already advised her on what documentation she'd need, that she had been planning this for some time, that she hoped we could be adults about it. She had been planning this for some time. I sat down. I didn't mean to. My legs just decided sitting was necessary. She had a lawyer. She had been building a case. While I was grocery shopping and changing the oil and smiling at dinners and filing away my own instincts because I didn't want to be the difficult one, she had been preparing for this conversation. Preparing before I even knew there was something to prepare for. I looked at her. I said, how long were you planning to leave? She said, that's between me and my attorney. I said, I need you to get out of my house. She said, it's our house. I said, call it what you want. I need you to not be in it today. She left at 9. She took a bag and her laptop and she kissed her own hand and touched the door frame on her way out, which I think was a performance for no one, or maybe for herself. I stood in the entryway and watched her car back out of the driveway. Then I went to the kitchen and sat down and Neve was already there. She had heard all of it. The whole morning. She didn't say she was sorry. I appreciated that. She didn't tell me I had handled it well because I hadn't. She just made me toast and sat down across from me and said, what do you need to do today? I said, I need to call an attorney. She said, okay. And she stayed at the table while I made the call, not listening, just present, looking at her own laptop, so that I wasn't sitting alone in that kitchen making the phone call that was going to take apart my entire adult life. The attorney's name was Beckett. I had found her the night before when I couldn't sleep. I told her what I had and she told me to bring it in that afternoon. She said the financial transfers were going to be important. She said the consultation Dorian had with her own attorney, the one I found the receipt for, suggested this had been in motion longer than I realized. She said that was actually useful for me. Not comforting. Useful. I went in at 2 o'clock. Neve drove me because I told her I didn't want to drive and she didn't make a thing out of it. She waited in the car. Beckett was direct. She walked me through what the next several weeks were going to look like. Filing, response periods, asset documentation. She told me what the hidden savings transfer meant in terms of the proceedings. She told me Dorian's earlier consultation, combined with the withdrawals, would be relevant. She did not tell me it was going to be easy, but she told me where I stood, and standing somewhere specific felt better than standing in the middle of nothing. When I got back in the car, Neve said, how did it go? I said, she thinks I have a clear case. Neve said, good. I said, are you leaving Thursday? She looked at me. Her original plan had been Thursday. That was day 15. She said, do you want me to? I said, no. She looked straight ahead through the windshield. She said, okay. Then I'll stay a bit longer. She called the contractor in Raleigh that night and pushed the timeline. She didn't tell me how long she was staying. She just stayed. Dorian's version started spreading. I knew it would. I had prepared myself for it or told myself I had. The reality was different. There is a particular feeling that comes when you walk into a coffee shop and see two people who know you both and watch their faces do something complicated when they see you. When you text a couple you used to have dinner with every other month and the response is warm but measured in a way it never used to be. When you realize the story being told about you is the one that got there first and first matters. Dorian had not said anything dramatic publicly. She was too careful for that. But she had lunches. She had conversations. She had the ability to cry in exactly the right moments with exactly the right people. She told people she was heartbroken. She told people things had been difficult for a long time. She did not say my name badly. She didn't have to. She just said certain things in certain ways to certain people and let their imaginations do the rest. One of our mutual friends, a woman named Shelby who I had genuinely liked, sent me a message that said she was there for both of us and that she hoped we could both heal. I read that message 4 times. What it meant was that she had heard something. What it was designed to communicate was neutrality. What it actually communicated was that she had chosen. I wrote back and said thank you, because what else do you say? Neve watched me navigate this without telling me it was unfair. Because she already knew it was unfair and saying so was not going to help me. What she did instead was practical. She helped me make a list of every financial account, every shared subscription, every insurance policy, every document that had both our names on it. She sat with me for 3 hours one afternoon and we went through all of it item by item. She was organized in a way that I was not in a state to be. She made the spreadsheets. She found the account numbers. She put things in folders. At one point I looked at her across the table surrounded by papers and I said, "Why are you doing this?" She stopped. She looked at me with that direct look she had. She said, "Because someone should have been doing this for you a long time ago." I didn't know what to say to that. She looked back at the papers. She said, "You're not difficult to take care of, Callum. Anyone who told you otherwise was lying." I did not say anything. But that sentence found something in me that I had been trying to convince myself wasn't there, and it didn't leave. I started going to the gym in the mornings just to have something to do with my body. To have somewhere to put all the physical energy that had no outlet. Neve came twice. She ran on the treadmill at a pace that suggested she was also working something out, and we drove home and made eggs and didn't talk about it. Dorian's attorney made an initial contact through Beckett. They tried, gently at first, to suggest the financial transfers had been a misunderstanding, that Dorian had been managing some personal savings that were hers pre-marriage. Beckett sent back documentation showing the funds had come from our joint account. That line of argument went quiet. Then they tried to suggest the marriage had been strained for years due to my emotional withdrawal. Beckett asked for specific dates and incidents. Nothing concrete came back. Then they sent a list of what Dorian was seeking in the settlement. I sat with that list for a long evening. I'm not going to detail all of it because some of it is still complicated and none of it is simple. But I will say that what she was asking for required a version of the story where she had been the one trying to hold things together. A version where I had been the obstacle. I called Beckett that night. I said, "What do we do?" She said, "We respond with documents." That's what we did. The next morning I drove past the house where Neve and I had gone to the gym and I thought, none of this is what I thought my life was going to be at 34. And then I thought, I'm not sure the life I thought I had was ever real. I still don't know which of those things is sadder. The divorce took 8 months. I'll say that up front because I want you to know it wasn't quick. It wasn't clean. It was the longest 8 months of my life, and there were days inside those months where I didn't do much more than get up and move from one room to another and remind myself that was still enough. Beckett was direct with me from the beginning. She said these things rarely resolve the way people expected, and that the most useful thing I could do was document everything and make decisions with my head and deal with what I was feeling somewhere separate from the legal proceedings. I tried. I didn't always succeed, but I tried. Dorian's side pushed on the emotional withdrawal argument 3 more times over those 8 months. Each time, Beckett asked for specifics. Each time, specifics did not materialize. What did materialize was the financial record, which was clear and documented and had dates attached to it. What also materialized was that Nathan's wife, whose name I learned was Tamsin, had found hotel charges on their joint account too. Her attorney made contact with Beckett in month 4. That was not something any of us had anticipated. But it reshaped the landscape in a way that was difficult for Dorian's side to work around. I felt something complicated when I found out about Tamsin. Not satisfaction. That's not the right word. It was more like a terrible recognition that I had not been alone in this, and that being not alone in it did not make it better. It just made it larger and sadder and more real than it had already been. I met Tamsin once, briefly, in the lobby of Brackett's building by coincidence. We stood next to each other for about 45 seconds while we both waited for the elevator. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. We both knew. The elevator came and we went to different floors. The settlement landed in month 8. I'm not going to give you numbers because that's not the point. The point is that it landed where the evidence put it. The hidden account was factored in. The prior attorney consultation was factored in. Dorian did not get the version where I had been the problem. She did not walk away with the story she had been trying to build. She also did not apologize. I had not expected her to. People like Dorian do not often arrive at apology because apology requires a moment where they stop managing the situation and just stand inside what they did. I don't think she could get there. Maybe she will someday. That's not something I'm waiting for. I moved into a small rental near the Swannanoa River the week the paperwork was finalized. 1 bedroom, old floors that creaked in 3 specific places I memorized quickly. A back porch that looked into a stand of hemlocks. It was nothing like the house on the nice side of Asheville. It did not have throw pillows. It had a couch I bought secondhand and a kitchen table with 4 chairs even though only 1 person lived there. Neve came over the first Saturday I was in that apartment. She brought food. She knocked on the door and stood on the porch holding 2 grocery bags, and when I opened the door she looked past me into the apartment and said, "You have 4 chairs." I said, "I didn't want to only have 1. She said, "Good." She came in. She cooked in my small kitchen while I sat on the counter and talked to her, and she handed me things to stir when she thought I needed something to do with my hands, which was often. We ate at the table with 4 chairs. We talked about her work in Raleigh, about a book she had just finished, about the hemlock trees on the porch and whether they ever changed color in the fall. Ordinary things. Real things. Dorian and Neve had not spoken since the night I moved into the guest room of my own house. That silence existed between them now. Neve talked about it only once, briefly, when I asked directly. She said she had reached out once, 2 months into the divorce proceedings, not to argue, just to say she was sorry the way things had gone. Dorian had not responded. Neve said she understood. She said she had known when she told me the truth that it was going to cost her something. She had decided what she could live with. I asked her if she regretted it. She thought about it for a real amount of time. Not a polite pause, an actual consideration. Then she said, "No. But I miss who I thought she was. And I don't know if that person was ever real." That answer stayed with me, because I understood it completely. I missed who I thought Dorian was. The woman from that vineyard on the Saturday in October with 60 people watching. The person I had built 7 years around. She had probably never been exactly that person. Or she had been partly in some moments, and then slowly stopped being her, and I hadn't noticed the shift because I was too busy staying in my lane and not asking questions and being useful. I don't say that to blame myself for what she did. She made her own choices. They were not my fault. But I had also chosen not to look when looking would have been uncomfortable. And that was mine to sit with. I sat with it, mostly on the back porch in the evenings, looking at the hemlocks. Neve and I didn't rush anything. I want to be clear about that. She was in Raleigh. I was in Asheville. We talked on the phone. We texted. She came to Asheville twice in the 3 months after I moved into the rental, and both times it was easy and warm and not complicated by anything we were pretending not to feel. But we also did not act on any of it. There was an understanding between us, unspoken but solid, that the ground needed to be stable before either of us took a step. She had lost a sister in the practical sense of that word. Not permanently, maybe, but the relationship had a fracture in it that might never fully close. That was a real loss. It was not small. I was not going to be the person who minimized it by moving too fast or treating her like a reward for surviving something difficult. And I also needed to know myself again. What I actually wanted. What I actually felt without someone else's management of the situation telling me how to interpret it. I needed time where I was just a person living in a small apartment near a river, figuring out who I was when no one was disappointed in me. That took longer than I expected. And it was also, quietly, one of the better things that has ever happened to me. I started cooking more. Real cooking, not the kind I did when I was trying to make Dorian's dinners look effortless. Just cooking for myself, bad experiments, things that didn't work, learning how to make a roux from scratch because I read about it and thought, why not? I bought a plant. It died. I bought another one. It's doing fine. I called old friends I had let drift during the marriage. Not to explain what had happened, just to call. To have conversations that had nothing to do with legal proceedings or evidence, or what someone's attorney had said. To talk about normal things. It was like remembering a language I had not used in years. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, Neve came to Asheville for a weekend. She stayed at a hotel downtown, not at my apartment, because that was the right thing and we both knew it. We had dinner on Friday night at a place near the river that had good food and low lighting and a table by the window where you could watch people walking by outside. We talked for 3 hours. It was the easiest 3 hours I had spent with another person in longer than I could place. At the end of the night, walking back to her car, she stopped on the sidewalk and looked at me. Just looked. And I looked back. And we both knew what we were standing at the edge of. She said, I don't want to be something that happened to you because of Dorian. I said, you're not. You're something that happened to me because you're you. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, okay, that was it. That was the whole conversation. A year after that dinner, after slow and careful and real, after phone calls and visits and learning the texture of each other's actual lives rather than just the crisis version. After Neve found a position at a firm in Asheville that she had been considering for months independently of anything to do with me, she moved into my apartment. Then we found a different place together. Bigger. With a porch that caught the morning light and a kitchen wide enough for 2 people to cook in at the same time without bumping into each other constantly, though we bumped into each other sometimes anyway. She still hands me things to stir when she thinks I need something to do with my hands. 2 years after she moved to Asheville, on a rainy evening in October, I drove her to the parking lot of a closed pharmacy on a street downtown. She didn't know where we were going. When I pulled in, she looked around and then looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. I said, this is where I thought my life was falling apart. She said quietly, I know. I said I was wrong. It was falling into place. She looked at me for a long time. Rain on the roof. The sign above us buzzing. Half the letters dark. Exactly the same as it always is. Then I asked her. She said yes before I finished the sentence. We got married 6 months later. Small. 30 people in someone's backyard in Weaverville. Her mother came. My mother cried, same as she always does. Neve's mother gave a toast. It was the right length. I stood there and I thought about all the moments that had to happen exactly the way they did to get to this particular backyard. The dinner party. The guest room at the end of the hall. The hallway at 11 at night. A woman stepping out of a door and saying please, somewhere private, in a voice barely above a breath. All of it, every uncomfortable and painful and necessary piece of it, leading to this. I'm not going to tell you everything happens for a reason. I don't know if I believe that, but I will tell you that the truth Neve told me in my own bedroom on night 12, the truth that cost her something real to tell, is what made everything that came after possible. Not just the marriage. The whole life. The cooking and the plant and the friends I called back and the man I understood myself to be when no one was quietly managing how I interpreted myself. She told me the truth when lying would have been so much easier. That's the whole story. If you've stayed with me through all 4 parts of this, I genuinely appreciate it more than I know how to say. If stories like this one are the kind of thing you want more of, real ones, human ones, the kind where nothing is clean and everything is true, then subscribe to this channel.
Sometimes the truth finds you. Even when everyone around you is trying to make sure it doesn't, it finds you. If this story is anything relatable to you, please drop comment how and where in the world you are watching from and subscribe. I will meet you in the next video.